Well, hello there, modern world history students. Let's go ahead and take a look at our last document for our Enlightenment DBQ. At this point, hopefully you've already started to set up the document. At the top, of course, goes our question. Enlightenment philosophers, what was their main idea? Hopefully you put an arrow next to document D. Underline the source. This source is from Mary Wollstonecraft, one of our Enlightenment philosophers. And this is taken from her text, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And I would circle the year 1792, which is going to indicate another primary source document. Finally, hopefully you've also put a star next to the notes. In this case, the note is a British author, Mary Wollstonecraft, wrote novels, a history of the French Revolution, a travel journal, and children's book in addition to this text. During the 18th century, most people believed that women should be beautiful, emotional, and dependent on men. So women were really necessarily stereotyped and kind of really limited in terms of what they were capable or what they were allowed to do. And therefore, again, women were discouraged to study some of the social sciences. So, for example, history, geography, rhetoric. Rhetoric would be kind of like discussion or debates, which teach people how to make logical and reasonable arguments. So for this particular document, there's two pieces, two chunks of chapters out of Mary's text. So the first one, let's go ahead and take a look at chapter 2, the prevailing opinion on the sexual character discussed. As we read through the first portion, just like our last documents, I want you to go ahead and follow along. And then please go ahead and circle the words that we don't know as we break down the document together. So again, chapter 2 up here at the top. The most perfect education, in my opinion, is to enable an individual to attain such habits of virtue as will render her independent. In fact, it's a farce to call any being virtuous whose skills do not result from the exercise of her own reason. All right, let's see if we can break down some of this vocabulary and see what Mary Wollstonecraft is getting at. So the most perfect education, to be smart, to have knowledge, in her opinion. Now remember, we've been talking about fact versus opinion. So right here straight out, Mary is using the term, in my opinion, is to enable or to allow or to instill the individual, the individual person to obtain or actually get such habits of virtue. Now, when we say virtue, I want you to think of goodness. Someone is virtuous, they have goodness, they are useful, they have purpose, as well to render her independent. So Mary definitely has a strong perspective that, her, in parentheses, women should be independent. In fact, it's a farce. If something's a farce, it's like a sham. It's like a scam. It's not real, it's fake. So farce means fake. To call any being virtuous, so anybody good, whose skills do not result from the exercise of her own reason. Remember, the word reason, circle that as well. When you see reason, you should always think you're thinking. We say the Enlightenment philosophers, they use logic and reason. So again, we're using our thinking, we're using our observation, we're using, again, analysis, we're using scientific methods. So in this case, again, where basically Mary's getting down to is to be good, to be productive members of society. Women, they don't necessarily just need to be, sitting there looking beautiful and pretty like porcelain dolls. They need to actually use their minds, and they need to have the freedom, of course, to, have knowledge and be independent. Now let's take a look down here for chapter number 12, on national education. Let's read it one time through, and as we go through, go ahead and circle the words you don't know and see if we can break that down together. To render mankind more virtuous and happier, of course, both sexes must act from the same principle. Women must be allowed to found their virtue on knowledge, which is scarcely possible unless they be educated in the same pursuits as men. For they are now made so inferior by ignorance and low desires as not to be deserved to be ranked with them. In short, reason and experience convince me that the only method of leading women to fulfill their particular duties is to free them from the restraint by allowing them to participate in the inherent rights of mankind. Make them free, and they will quickly become wise and virtuous. All right, so to render, to create mankind more virtuous, more good, and Mary kind of again says to be good, to be wise, and happier. So with that goodness is going to be happiness. Both sexes. So if you use the term sexes, we're talking about gender. We're talking both men and women must act in the same principle, the same idea, okay, from the same place. And women must be allowed to found or find their virtue, their goodness, on knowledge. That's how we make good, productive, involved members of society, is giving them knowledge. And right now, Mary says it's scarcely or it's hardly possible. We're not going to obtain that happiness or knowledge unless that women finally get a chance to be educated in the same pursuits. If you're pursuing something, you're going after something, you're chasing something. So in this time period, women, yes, maybe they were educated, but maybe they were more educated in domestic things. How to cook, how to clean, how to host a tea party, how to sew, how to paint, how to write, how to play music. That's not the same, again, that's important, valuable knowledge, but that's not necessarily the same pursuits or the same direction that men are chasing. Men, they're going to be educated in the social science. They're going to learn thinking and analysis and talk about government and talk about economics and talk about religion and talk about freedom and all these Enlightenment ideas. Because remember, at the top we said that this document was written in 1792. So already the Enlightenment ideas, going back to even John Locke in the 1600s, these ideas are circulating out there. So Mary says we got to understand it, pursue these same as men. Because right now they're made so inferior. If you're inferior to someone, you're less than, okay, by their ignorance. Now, ignorance, we're talking about they lack the knowledge. So they lack the knowledge, they're less than men, and they have the low desires or the wants. If you desire something, you want something. You have a drive for it. And because of that, they don't deserve to be ranked with them. So Mary is putting that perspective that we got to give women that chance. So in short, so basically summarizing, reason and experience. So again, our two main ideas from the Enlightenment, observation and reason. So she's observed from her experience, she is a female. So these two things convince her or prove to her that the only method of leading women to fulfill their particular duties is to free them from all restraint. So they can't be restrained, they can't be limited, they can't be necessarily sort of tracked in one direction, and allow them to participate in the inherent, the given rights of mankind. Men have the right to, again, express views and vote and think, and Mary is basically pushing that is something not just for men, but all of mankind, both men and women. If you make them, so if we're talking about women, make them free, and they will have quickly become wise and virtuous. So if we sort of, give women freedom to have that education, have that voice, they're going to become smarter, they're going to become good people, and they're going to become good for society. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and boil down to the questions for document D. All right, so document D, number 1, the bottom, the document analysis questions. Number 1, in what year is Mary Wollstonecraft writing these words? What revolution is going on at the time? In 1792, we're going to be discussing in this time period, we've already started a period known as the French Revolution. In fact, the French Revolution has been going on for 3 years up to this point. So when we start talking about how this enlightenment, how this turning point of new ideas and challenges and thinking is going to influence both our American and our French revolutions. Number 2, how does Wollstonecraft believe women compare to men? What does Wollstonecraft recommend in order to make women equal with men? Compared to men, Mary thought that women were basically ignorant. They didn't know any better. They lacked the knowledge. of the important kinds of things you need to know about. They lack the desire or the drive or the ambition, what it really needs to think critically in these areas. And what she believes is that the key is basically education. They got to have the same chance to be educated in the same pursuits or same subjects as men. For example, history, geography, argumentative, debate, and all those types of different subjects. Number 3, what methods did Wollstonecraft use to reach her conclusions? Okay, so she came down to her conclusions, reason and experience. She challenged other enlightened thinkers, these Enlightenment thinkers, to look at women and think about their place in their world in a reasonable way. Because for the most part, when we talk about those previous philosophers and we're talking about natural rights, that all men are entitled to life, liberty, property, and Thomas Jefferson writes in the Declaration, all men are created equal. Most of these men are still talking about just men. So Mary Wollstonecraft is trying to, again, get the word out that women should be included in that discussion. So bottom line, number 4, I should say, what is her main idea? Wollstonecraft believes that women, in order to compete with men, must be educated. They must have the freedom to get an education and study and learn, and their education must focus on reasonable, where they can practice the use of their reasoning skills. So for the last piece again, why do we think the main ideas of Wollstonecraft are similar to Locke and Voltaire? To build a better society or a stronger country, all of these thinkers place pretty big importance on freedom. When it comes down to it, when we start writing our DBQs, I want you to really focus on the idea of freedom. So Mary Wollstonecraft, of course, wanted free women from the restraints. Don't let them necessarily be trapped and not have the same opportunity as men. Locke wrote down that men are born in a state of perfect freedom. They have the freedom to choose their government, have that voice, and again, if government's not doing its job, the freedom to get involved and create a new one. And then Voltaire, of course, going back to document B, is going to provide a rational argument that people should be tolerant and have the freedom to practice their own religion. So definitely as we continue on to the next few steps of organizing our evidence and of course eventually our outline and our essay, keep that concept of that main idea of individual freedom. Alright, so I think that's going to go ahead and wrap up our last document in our packet, document D. So we'll go ahead and we'll see you in the classroom, folks.